Welcome back, MTG Joe here. Today we're doing another installment of the weekly metagame breakdown where we look at the best performing, highest win rate, standard best of one decks. If you're looking for best of three, other formats, we cover them weekly. Just look at the playlist. We get the data from UntapkedGG, a third-party companion tool that tracks user win rates, tracks your own win rates, gives a whole bunch of cool stats, lets us know like recent mythic players, what lists they're using, whole bunch of cool features and game overlays. Link for Untapped is in the video description. I will paste all these deck lists, timestamp them as well, so you can use them to your heart's content. We're going to start off with looking at the popularity of the day, just kind of the distribution of decks. We're going to look Diamond and Mythic rank, and then we're going to look at the actual win rates of a bunch of different decks. Majority in Diamond and Mythic rank, a couple that I pulled from Platinum to Mythic, then a couple community decks that have done well for individuals. So not the largest sample size, but decks that are outside of kind of the norm that people have gotten Mythic with. That's kind of the schedule for today. We'll be back with the rest of the week through the various other videos leading up to the weekend for the Timeless Qualifier play-in and Qualifier weekend itself. That's kind of where we're at for the week. I do have a question for YouTube folks. With the new Dustborn set coming out, what card or cards are you most excited to play, whether it be standard, EDH, commander, whatever it may be? The set's coming out in like 2-3 weeks. I'm really excited for the new land cycle. I think there'll be a nice addition, just more untapped dual lands, always something useful in the format, but very curious to see what you're most interested in. So let's jump into it. We have popularity of the day, the Rakdos Aggro deck. Basically mono red aggro with the fling effects. It's about 20%. You pair it with just the more traditional mono red. This one's usually a little bit more mouse focused. It is about 30% of the games in best of one. That can win very quickly. There is actually a new turn 2 combo in mono red that it was going to be available in Dustborn. I did feature it as part of a YouTube short explaining how the combo works. But it's just basically an addition through the new ley line to these existing decks that could have. It's not like unusual. It's not like multiple pieces. It's basically what you're playing right now with the ley line in your opener. But I explain it with that. I'll link it in there if you're interested to see what that combo looks like. We have Selesnya Rabbits at about 13%. Azorius Control starting to see an uptick at about 4%. The discard deck at 3, Mice at 3, Orzhov Midrange at 3, and then Rakdos Lizards. It's kind of fallen off in terms of just its play rate. If we're looking kind of the archetype, we usually see at the beginning of each month a big spike in terms of the aggressive decks. Mono red, or the Rakdos deck alone, was at 30%. It's hovering around 20 right now. We see the uptick at the beginning of each month with the ladder reset of these aggressively slanted decks. So if we are looking, we have Diamond and Mythic rank, 34,000 games of Magic played, and a surprise highest win rate. Mono blue tempo. Everyone had this on your bingo cards, right? So not the biggest. It is kind of a newer deck. I haven't tried this one out, so can't really speak to some of its merits, but it's kind of the update of the old Haughty Jin decks. We got Eluge, the Shoreless Sea, mythic 4-drop, really could only be played in, I would say, like a mono blue shell. Power and toughness are equal to the number of islands you control. Whenever it enters or attacks, you put a flood counter on target land. It's an island in addition to its other types as long as it's there. So not super relevant in terms of that text, just the blast zones you could kind of convert. And then the first instant and sorcery spell you cast each turn costs blue or 1 less for each land you control with a flood counter. So it does make your larger spells cheaper, can potentially have you just free casting spells. We have that, as well as the Eddy Merc Crab. So this is another one of the cost reduction based on spells. Flash 5/5 comes in, taps some stuff down, and then it comes into play tapped itself if it's not your turn. Otherwise, just a lot of kind of cheap interaction. Into the Flood Maw as bounce. You have Afara's Dispersal as another bounce effect. So if the target creature is attacking, it costs 2 less. These are really nice ways with like the mono red deck. They can play a bunch of pump effects. Doesn't matter, you just bounce it back to their hand. It's not really contingent on their sizing. You have Phantom Interference as counter, 3-step ahead as counter, sleight of hand for card manipulation, Moment of Truth as kind of card manipulation, anticipate style effects, negates mixed into there. And then flow of knowledge just draws you a ton of cards based on all the islands you control. Really interesting one there. We then go to the Rakdos Aggro deck, 62%. So this deck here, you'll see varied numbers. This deck now is just kind of completely foregoing at times the red-black lines. If you have them, it's just, you play the Sulphur Springs, it's just the insurance if you do have to cast Callous Sellsword. I'd say 90, 95, maybe even 99% of the games you're not going to do it. But it's just a way to kind of play it there. This one's featuring a little bit more burn interaction with some shocks and lightning strikes. The number of pump effects does at times vary. This allows you to have a little bit of interaction for the mirror. You don't have these, you're just playing the kind of all pump spell version. It's very much a race then. It's whoever kind of on the play, whoever draws kind of their package or their sequencing a little bit better. But the big kind of combo of the deck, Scamp or Heartfire Hero, progressively get bigger with pump effects. Then you fling it at your opponent and deal kind of double death damage. This deck's actually, like a port of it, is becoming popular in Pioneer and Explorer as well, putting up a lot of results. So if you're interested in like kind of moving over to the Explorer format and have this deck, while your mana base is going to be a little bit more in depth in terms of the Rakdos lands, investing in Rakdos lands is probably one of the safest. It makes you go to sacrifice Rakdos mid, historic decks, timeless decks. It's a very safe mana base to invest in, and it kind of plays to this kind of theme of the deck as well. We then have Azorius Affinity. So this is a synthesizer deck. It's at 58%. So Simulacrum Synthesizer, that is one that you could keep saying 20 times fast. Cares about you casting artifacts with value 3 or more, and then you get Constructs, which are basically the nickname for the tokens of +1/1 for each artifact you control. So you're playing a bunch of things like Braided Net as like pseudo removal, kind of tempo elements. The Esoteric Duplicator. Whenever you sacrifice it or another artifact, you may pay 2. If you do, at the beginning of your end step, create a token copy of that artifact. So you can sacrifice the duplicator, make some copies, kind of value like that. Lockdown is a sweeper. You have a bunch of removal, get lost, smites, some counters, spring-loaded saw blades as another instant speed removal, no more lies as tempo elements. Spellgyre can be a counter or just a draw effect. Sunfalls as sweepers, Mightstone, Meekstone, artifact can be removal, can be card advantage, and then one Steel Seraph can make your various creatures have flying, lifelink, whatever is relevant. Takes advantage of a lot of the utility lands in the deck. We then go to Rabbits, 57%. So a couple different ways you can build it. There's been some lower to the ground ones, like the number of Phineas could vary. You can, I've tried one in the video that we did with the demo that was playing the 2-mana adventure one. Found like there wasn't enough low to the ground tokens. Your tokens usually come a little bit later. Phineas is strong if it can, like you can untap with it. It is usually a big target. This version's playing a couple more war leaders, just a useful kind of those cliche 4-drops that make tokens, give you boost type effects. The Offspring works nicely too. Night Air and Avios as a way to kind of get some card advantage. Season of Burrow can be used to hit temporary lockdowns, stuff like that. The version I was playing a couple copies of Elspeth's Smite in the main. It gives you a little bit more game in the mono red matchup. I found the mono red fling, whatever you want to call it, to be the toughest matchup because you're an aggressive deck, but you do need a little bit of setup. You can outscale them in terms of just sheer creature power, but they usually go over the top with pump effects. The trample could make the blocking a little awkward, and then they have fling as well, which makes it a little complicated. But I found that to be the harder matchup. Otherwise, a lot of the creature mirrors you can kind of scale up a little bit bigger than like lizards or something like that. Deck takes advantage of Cavern and a couple of the villages in here. Then go to Orzhov Midrange, just a shade under 57%. So this is good midrange cards deck. So cut downs, disfigures, go for the throats, pest control, cheap removal, Shrouded Shepherd can be used as removal. Just lots of ways to kind of deal with your opponent's things. Legion of Ashes as removal. You have some virtues, so a lot of things to kill. Lily can be removal in a pinch against some decks. You have the bats in here. Yawgmoth can draw you some cards. Preacher can gain you some card advantage, some creatures. Zorlin can get back all these 3-drops for you as well as provide you some life gain. Shelly's, Beza's, just a lot of good Orzhov cards. Bat, God, just try to outgrind your opponent in those matchups. You do run a little bit of the risk. You could keep hands potentially of a lot of removal, and then you play against like a control deck. You keep hands of a little bit more kind of grind value, and then you could be against, mono red on a sick curve on the play. But a lot of powerful threats in this deck. Then go to mono red aggro. So a little bit different in this deck. You won't have the fling effects. This one is on the mouse package. So you will have Emberheart Challenger, Manifold Mouse, which is basically the mouse incarnation of Embercleave. Plays really nicely with like Heartfire Hero. It triggers the Valiant for your Emberheart or Heartfires to get that value. Might of the Meek could give trample. The Demonic Ruckus can give trample. The Monstrous Rage obviously could give trample. So lots of ways to kind of power through. A lot of interaction with Lightning Strike and Shocks. So it's just a matter, if you're playing against the Fling deck, you usually want to be somewhat proactive, I find. While you do want to kind of at times catch them, I use a pump effect, and then you kill their creatures to kind of fizzle, make them waste mana in that. They can kind of outscale this damage fairly quickly, especially with something like a Swift Spear that gets prowess. It's usually just good to do proactively kill it, I find. Do it when it's not in combat. So even if they have to use a protection effect, they don't get the residual kind of bonus in terms of power. Then go to Azorius Control. So this one is a platinum deck, 65%. And this one here, just a lot of similar effects. Card that's seeing a bit of an uptick with these death triggers on things like the Scamp and stuff like that. Killing it at times is not always the best option because you still take the damage. So not on my watch, just exiles, doesn't care about the power. Something like Elspeth's Smite could also get outscaled in terms of the creature power. Just a flexible card to kill creatures and exile them, not even kill. Temporary Lockdown, Sunfalls. You have some counters in here. No More Lies, 3 Steps Ahead, Deduce for card advantage. You have the new Memory Deluge that's not as good, but it's trying. So 4 mana, look at the top 4 cards. If the spell's bargain, look at the top 8. Put 2 of them into your hand, rest of the bottom. You can make tokens. So I would probably say you want some mirror pools. Or not, what's it called? The Fountain Port. In the mana base, I think it's just good to have a couple of those. It kind of plays into the Farsight Ritual, gives you something to spend your mana. That or Myrex, just something to use your mana when you're not doing. I think Fountain Port's a little bit better with these types of decks just because you can block with the creatures as well. Spellgyre is another kind of counter effect, and then just kind of going from there. Then go to 4-color Reanimator. So this deck here, we featured it last week. It was the second highest win rate. In Diamond up, it's fallen a little, but in Platinum, it's still doing well, 59%. Core of this deck is your kind of self-milling, Archaeologist, Founding, Picklock, Whale of the Forgotten. Always kind of put cards into your graveyard. You can Jace yourself. And then what you're trying to do is use Squirming Emergence to reanimate. So you can reanimate like Lumra, get back all your lands, Atraxa, Harvester Misery, Elish Norn, whatever it may be. Splunking makes your lands come into play tapped, which is nice with the Lumra as well. Bunch of cheap interaction with the deck. Then go to Rakdos Lizards, another deck that's doing well at like Platinum rank, falling a little. It's like the low to mid 50s in Diamond up. So a couple different variations. You might see like the Shale, the cost reduction, target creature gets lifelink and indestructible. This one's on the bats as a little bit more disruption. Go for the throat, cut down as removal, and just a bunch of powerful lizard synergies. This one's also on 3 warlocks as a way to have some hand hate in the deck. But there's card advantage between Laughing Jasper Flint, Fireglass Mentor. It cares about pings, so the sequencing is fairly important. Playing Fireglass before combat, so that way you get the effect, whereas Flamecash Gecko sometimes will want to be cast after combat. The Hired Claw can trigger a damage without having to actually deal combat damage. So it's a whole bunch of little sequencing things that takes a little bit of getting used to in terms of the deck. Then we got 3 community decks. This one from a name I cannot pronounce. So they went relatively strong, 89-67. Like if you're mid 50s, it's a reasonable deck. They had a nice kind of run in Mythic as well, 15-4, which you'd like to see once they kind of cross that finish line. So this is an Abzan Control deck, kind of Abzan Ramp. So you do have a little bit of blue just for Atraxa. Pretty much every Ramp deck's an Atraxa deck. but just whole bunch of removal. Get lost, go for the throat. Interesting, no cut downs, but you have like temporary lockdowns, urgent necropsy. This is really flexible because it could hit enchantment, stuff like that. Keep harvest, ramp, life gain, Terra Sun, they're flexible. Deadly cover up as a sweeper and kind of a surgical extraction effect. Spinewood Armadillo can be used to help you find your lands, along with like herd migration. So kind of a split between those. Aya is your win condition. Any of these are kind of your win conditions in a way. You got some Bezas that can also help you win the game. Some Restless Cottages, but just a lot of ways to kind of kill things. Outrageous Robbery can be a huge kind of mana sink as well for the deck. We then go to Pain Train. So they went to 12 and 2. It's not the biggest sample, but interesting take on Jeskai Control. So they are on a number of bandits' talent. Whenever you commit a crime, you put a counter on it once per turn, and then you can draw cards afterwards. So a little bit of cheap interaction. The red's basically for Lightning Helix and Ill-Time Explosion. Interesting is they're opting for 4 mana kind of exile effects that happen to give you life. The Static Net makes a token, so it draws you off the Caretaker's talent. Prayer Binding is just another way to kind of gain some life off it. Season of Burrow as a way to kind of trigger it. So just a lot of removal. Chimley can help you kind of cascade into a lot of these effects through Discover as well. Your Fountain Port's in here. Restless Anchorage, some Myrex in here. There's a lot of colorless lands, which is kind of interesting. I would probably maybe skimp on maybe like 1 Myrex, maybe a Demolition Field. You do have some double whites, and just like these early drops, you can't really cast with 8 colorless effects. That would be my only kind of suggestion from looking at the mana base. Then lastly, we have Dr. Burgrass. This is 77 and 52. This one was kind of a wild journey. Watch it, seeing there. Was this the one? Oh no, they had it fairly consistent. I think it was this one here where they were up and down. One of the decks, they were like winning a bunch, losing a bunch, winning a bunch. So this one here is a Rakdos joins up deck. So Reanimating Legends. So it's a bunch of kind of self-mill enablers. You have Bitter Reunion, Bitter Triumph can pitch. The Brass Tunnel or Matsalanti can put cards into your graveyard. Reanimate it with Rakdos joins up or pull. Push can also be removal. Virtue's removal. So the card's a little deceiving. This at times can be a 2-drop. This is a 2-drop. Phyrexian Flesh Gorger as a 3-drop lifelinker. But this one's kind of cool. You got Driven Nod, Carnage Dominus, card we haven't really seen any play. If a creature dying triggers an ability, it triggers an additional time. So double death off Rakdos joins up, so they would take 16 damage. Kind of cool. Atalis, Atraxas, just kind of big top end stuff. Survive the early game, play the big stuff, kind of win from there. That's it for the week. Let me know what you think, what you've been playing, what you've been enjoying, and we'll catch you next time. Thanks for watching.